and Happy New Year. I can't believe this is January the 2nd.
Hey,
Welcome to the week Unspun, a weekly live look through the eyes of PR pros from around the world. My name is Fazana Badjuel here in London.
David Gallagher, also here in London.
and I'm Doug Downs in Canada's Rocky Mountains.
Now, gentlemen, we have a lot to get through. Now, please do, audience, give your comments as usual. If we don't have time there and then to bring them up, we will bring them up at the end of the show. And also, do let us know what your New Year's resolutions are. We'd love to hear from you. Now, this week, we have quite a few things that we're going to look at. We're going to look at the situation in Iran, and that's going to be Doug who's going to be laying out that stall for us. And then we're going to zoom out and examine how and why President Trump seems to be rebranding everything with his name. And then we'll peer into 2026 with some helpful resources. So, Doug, let's start with
you. So the Iran protests, they've turned deadly now. Iran is in its biggest wave of unrest since 2022. This was driven by a plunging currency and a cost of living shock. The protests, they actually started on Sunday with shopkeepers in Tehran, but now this is spread throughout the country, including the rural areas. And that's a big part of this. On the free market, $1 buys roughly 1.35 million rials. £1, 1.82 million rials. Unreal. Official data puts inflation at 42%. So people are feeling the crunch here. And the tone of the protest, this is big, has shifted since Sunday. They aren't just about the economic collapse anymore. They're openly anti-government. We want the mullahs gone is a common refrain, not just in Tehran again, throughout the rural areas. So the government's in full crisis comms mode. The headline move is a substantial shift in tone from the president. He's told officials to hear the protesters' legitimate demands and push toward dialogue. Rod Cartwright would say that sounds like classic de-escalation script. He's right. But in Iran, that hasn't been done before. The state's playbook has always leaned hard on control, not consent. Iranian officials have acknowledged economic pain in the past, but calling demands legitimate and talking about dialogue with protest leaders is unprecedented. And the story can feel a bit underplayed in the media, although it's certainly grabbing big headlines now, especially today. It's because access is tight. Verification is hard. Reporting is difficult with fragments of video that need to be substantiated and independently confirmed. And that's hard with stuff coming from Iran. So these are the ripple effects that I see. The narrative split inside Iran. The government has two key messages out there. One, they have legitimate demands. And two, hey, this is all foreign interference. The second ripple effect is more sanctions, which is kind of where the headlines are leaning today. And don't forget the energy costs that ripple out to all of us, right? The petrol costs, the gas costs at the gas station, and then shipping and insurance costs, even without major supply disruption. Perceived risk can push up war risk insurance and freight costs, which feeds inflation pressure downstream for you and me. So for Zen, I guess first I'll go to you. What do you see happening? I see this as a substantial change in tone coming from the leadership of Iran. A different key message. How do you see it?
I mean, Iran, I've always been fascinated. In the sort of East, is always considered, it has got this incredible history, almost like a sort of the Paris of the East. My father always grew up sort of, quoting Persian poetry and philosophy, incredibly old civilization. I think what's quite interesting is that when you have countries like Iran that are on the brink of war, they often would leverage their diaspora, and diaspora is often referred to as a living bridge, a really important sort of communications channel for a state. Now, the problem with Iran's diaspora is that there is a deep disconnect because the majority of the diaspora around the world are actually very, very unhappy with the state because they fled in 1979 with the fall of the Shah of Iran. So they tend to be the westernized liberal elite that fled. And so they will not be helping the state in their sort of communications and lobbying efforts. And, and they themselves are quite influential. You've got huge communities in the US, so much so I think in California it's called Tehrangeles. You've got a huge community in London, in Germany as well. And they no doubt have also been helping in lobbying various different sort of Western governments in terms of what is happening there with regards to women's rights and a number of others. So I think that diaspora aspect is really interesting because Iran uniquely has a diaspora that is very sort of vehement against the state.
And David, I mean, today the headlines are Iran saying, hey, Trump, stay out of our business. And there's talk about him increasing economic sanctions. Is that just normal for a Western president or a U.S. president when Iran is suffering and in the headlines to step on their throat, so to speak?
Yeah,
Like,
well, I would guess so. And this might surprise you to hear me say this. I think this could be an opportunity for Trump to have a little bit of a win. I mean, the U.S. has had an adversarial relationship with Iran at least since the 80s and the hostage crisis. Not sitting in the U.S., I don't know how this one's playing out in U.S. media, but I think the U.S. media might be sympathetic to an aggressive push in support of the resistance against the Iranian regime. So Trump could get a win out of this if he plays it well.
Excellent.
I'm interested. Just you mentioned at the when you kicked this off, Doug, just about how this has an impact outside of Iran, and I don't want to diminish what could be a life or death situation for a lot of Iranians. So that's a thing in and of itself. But I'm just picturing our colleagues sitting on media teams in the energy business, in the logistics business, in the banking business, because this will have ripple effects that could go well into to next week. So I do think it's fascinating. I wonder who's advising the Iranian president right now. Is this homegrown, or is this a strategy they're adapting from international resources?
Isn't that fascinating? I wish I knew more about the landscape in Iran. Farzana, you and I on Stories and Strategies, the podcast, we get about 100 listens per month from Tehran in particular. Yeah. And I've never been able to figure that out. But obviously, there's as you say, a diaspora, a whole world, a complicated community that exists in Iran and Tehran itself that I just don't know enough about.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those closed countries that I think people have been incredibly fascinated to go to understand it more. And I think time will tell to see whether or not it opens up to the rest of the world.
Well, if any of our listeners know about the structure of the industry there, the comms industry, there is one. I was invited to speak there a few years ago, and my employer at the time wouldn't insure my travel, so I had to decline that. But I am curious about the structure of the industry, which I think is probably pretty resilient, but it's very inward focused, as you say, Farzana. Maybe it's a moment for us to shift gears, maybe zoom out or zoom back to the U.S. You drew our attention to this kind of branding spree.
Yes,
President Trump seems to be on with one in particular.
Yeah. So I've been going to the US for such a long time because I've got a lot of cousins out there. And I used to always, and particularly in Chicago, I've got a lovely sort of family friend who I used to go and visit. And other than the freezing cold, the only thing I can remember is Trump's name on the buildings in very prominent sort of parts. And I remember thinking back then, God, who is this man? And it's extraordinary because actually when you think about it, a lot of people would put up skyscrapers, but they wouldn't understand the value of putting their name brand. And so Trump did do that in the early years. And that does show an understanding of the value of branding. And over here, what you see is you've started to have, during his second term, he's attached his name to a growing number of American institutions and symbols. We've got over here the Trump Kennedy Center, America's most prestigious performing arts venue. We've also seen his name attached to the Donald J. Trump United States Institute of Peace, Trump accounts for newborn babies, Trump gold cards for wealthy residency seekers, a proposed Trump class of U.S. Navy battleships, a Trump commemorative coin tied to America's 250th anniversary, which very excitedly is this year, and Trump's portraits appearing on federal buildings and national park passes. Now, this isn't a policy announcement. It is a branding event. And I want to, first of all, go to you, David, because I want you to shed some light on some witty resistance that has come to fore.
Well, I wish I had thought of this, and this is just in response to one of the examples you raised. But a guy named Toby Morton, who has written for South Park, the satirical show, immediately saw the opportunity to get the rights to TrumpKennedyCenter.org and put up a satirical website. It's still live. It's worth going to take a look at. So, does that diminish the impact? I don't know, but it was just kind of a funny thing to do. I guess
these are the same guys that said blame Canada every step of the way, right? South Park. I just want to put that in perspective.
It's a go-to strategy, Doug.
Right.
I guess one thing I look about this bigger move, and you'd mentioned this in an earlier conversation, Farzana, about Trump maybe having some concern about his legacy. What lasts beyond his presidency, and that's nothing new. The Egyptian pharaohs did that with the pyramids too. So I think that's kind of an understandable human reaction. Usually they wait to be dead or wait to have the building named for them. They don't do it themselves. But I think this is sort of true to his MO. He loves the visibility of these things. I think he likes trolling the libs like me who kind of overreact sometimes on social media and feeding the base. And I got to be honest, every one of these moves opens the door for what I think is kind of his main motivation, and that's gifts and contributions and contracts and a lot of revenue, some above board, some maybe not, get attached to these types of moves. So it's not surprising. Maybe it's just, to me, it's the depth and breadth of his move to rebrand everything.
So I'll take a slightly different angle at this. I do think it's legacy. He's going for legacy. He sees the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. You've got the mainstream media that's framing this as a growing exodus from the artists pulling out of the Kennedy Center. The institution itself is trying to flip the optics from artists taking a stand to artists boycotting the arts. The president, Rick Grinnell, saying, you're boycotting the arts to prove you support the arts. And that's been his approach. He's labeling the cancellations as stunts and shifting the target to access and inclusion, saying that perhaps previously it was a more exclusive type of atmosphere at the Trump Kennedy Center. The other angle is the brand alignment for the artist. They're taking a principled stand, which, I always really admire. So it is a tempting strategy to add your brand to various buildings and services. You've got instant ownership. The public can attach outcomes to a person instead of a bureaucracy, or to a brand instead of bureaucracy. Direct to audience legacy building. If you assume that traditional coverage won't credit you, you hard code your name into the artifact itself. And then there's the whole media environment incentive. In the US, trust in mass media is genuinely very, very low. And Trump is obviously concerned about how he's going to be remembered and portrayed by a still somewhat influential mass media. It's so low. Gallup puts trust for the media at 28% amongst Republicans. So incredibly low. I'm less interested in whether the renaming strategy is tasteful or the politics of this, and I'm more interested in whether it's effective brand strategy. Does the name stick, or does it get peeled off the moment the political weather changes? Eventually, the Republicans won't be in office. David, the world will make sense at that point, right? But does the Trump name just get peeled off as a temporary sticker? Do the artists see support or damage from having taken their principled stance? Taste is subjective, impact is not.
But yeah, there's also another play. It's not just about, his name. It's about building a potential political dynasty as well. And just like in the Kennedys, you have different generations of politicians. No doubt a number of his children will be vying for position in the near future as well. And so it is, I think it's fascinating actually, because, but it also does carry reputational risk, because you're now beginning to see a lot of allegations that are being leveled at the Kennedy, the Trump Kennedy sort of Lincoln Center in terms of financial mismanagement ever since a Trump appointee has been chairing the board. So it could also backfire as well. So I think time will tell.
Yeah, and more widely, we've talked about this separately, Farzana, just about philanthropy washing and legacy washing, and how if you are an institution, you really need to be careful who you associate with. Of course, the Kennedy Center had no vote in this specifically, but anyway, it's an interesting story and one to watch. I thought if you would indulge me, I would zoom out a little bit and maybe move away from the headlines and just mention a conversation I had with a friend last week who is a producer. She's in the film and TV business. And I didn't get her permission to quote her, so I won't mention her name here. But we were talking about the show Pluribus. And if you haven't watched it, you should. It's streaming on Apple. It's kind of a reverse apocalypse show, I guess you could call it. I don't want to give you any spoilers here, but it's a really pretty remarkable piece of drama. Mm-hmm. This spot isn't about the show. I just thought I would mention it in the context while we were talking about it, because she was telling me how hard it is in a show like this with unpredictable plot twists. If you're in the episode, if you're a character in the episode, you really can't be aware or show that you're aware. You probably are not aware of what the bigger storylines are, because you're so embedded in the scene, in the episode. And forgive me if I'm stretching this metaphor, but it's made me think about us and our business. We get so embedded in the scene, in the episode. I think sometimes it's easy to lose sight of bigger storylines, bigger arcs that are happening. Even when we talk about things like AI, I find us jumping to the question about, will it change the billable hour model? Well, maybe, but it's probably going to have bigger implications than that, maybe bigger than we can see in this scene or episode. And it might be interesting and worthwhile to think about that. So I thought I would just share 3 resources that I have found over the last week or so to be helpful in terms of thinking about bigger themes, bigger storylines that I think will be important for us in the business of communication and in PR. And at the end, I'm going to ask you both kind of where you get your information, what your media diet looks like, so you can be thinking about that. But the first thing I want to reference is the Substack newsletter, 7 Things. It's from our friend Adrian Monk. He's been on this show before. He writes very imaginatively on Threads, so he's experimenting with new platforms and more channels. And he speaks about corporate affairs and kind of macroeconomics. And in his last issue of the year, he outlines 7 themes. And each one of these are probably worth a full discussion on their own. He talks about how supply chains are changing, how actually it's the insurance business that's driving the discussion on climate change, the move to private capital and private equity from public markets, about how China and the US are actually partners in a lot of ways on AI. Who's going to bring up the next generation of talent in professional service firms? What is the actual future of the so-called BRICS, and then the AI energy question? So these are all really big questions that are bigger than what we might be thinking about in day-to-day public relations or communication, but they're definitely going to influence the overall arc of our story. So I just encourage you to take a look and subscribe to his Substack if you're not already. Similarly, there's a woman named Catherine Arrow. She's British, but based in New Zealand. She told me she listens to this show on the tomorrow over her coffee because it's too late for her. And she's just produced a remarkable report. I just saw it yesterday, called Divided on Purpose. And she also is looking at global risk for 2026. I'm a big fan of the World Economic Forum, which produces their global risk report probably in the next week or so. I think in some ways hers is even better. She takes it to a very personal, localized level, what you can do to think about and prepare yourself as communicators for looking at these risks. And she outlines 10. Some of them, I won't go through them all here because I know some of you are listening, but she overlaps a little bit with Adrian's list, but looks at wars that don't seem to be ending, about misinformation, about the pace and expansive nature of AI, about polarization. What I love about her take is that she talks about who's winning from these things, who's losing from these things, and then what you can do as an individual and as a leader in communication. So take a look at her Substack. Again, her name is Catherine Arrow, and you can download this report. And then I know we all love podcasts, and our friends over at Communication Breakdown had a really good year-end finale, looking back on what I think will continue to be a conversation theme for us, but for PR people, and that's the impact of the Trump administration on corporate communications. And they take a pretty neutral view, looking at companies that went all in and position themselves as fully aligned with the Trump agenda, especially in the tech sector, to those who were more cautiously neutral. They talked about the Coca-Cola denial about their new Coke product. And they looked at Harvard University, which has been more of an active vocal resistor to the Trump policies, and just kind of lay out the pros and cons. So I just think these are interesting things for us to look at and be mindful of. And if people like this kind of thing, I'll try to maybe every week drop in a resource that struck me as interesting. But I'm wondering what you guys think, either in reaction to those those three approaches, or just how do you keep yourself outside of the scene if you can? And what do you look at to inform your thinking? Like, what's your daily media? What's the first thing you look at when you get up for a view on what's going on in the world?
Yeah. So the first thing I look at is actually the New York Times. I quite like the New York Times app, and then I sort of go through the whole Guardian, BBC, the Times, the Telegraph, and I scan sort of just the images and the headlines, and then I obviously sort of do a deep dive if I like it. Al Jazeera as well, I always look at, and that's kind of like first thing in the morning, and then actually when I'm walking the dog after my breakfast, podcasts. So Communication Breakdown I always listen to, and also the other PR sort of podcasts, which I absolutely love. So podcasts I get increasingly my news from, and then also the WhatsApp groups that I'm on, they always share really interesting stories, and I love getting people's sort of insights on it. But what I try and do as much as possible is go and meet with people who I don't particularly like, people whose views are very different than mine, and I really try and bite my tongue and just listen and try and understand, because it's so easy for us to just have these algorithmic bubbles that just reinforce. And in PR, you just can't do that. You just cannot be partisan in that sense of only getting inputs from one area. So I really try hard to go into spaces and speak to people and engage with people that do not necessarily share my views. And it is hard. But
I've seen you do it. You're very good at it. You're much more skillful at it than I am. How about you, Doug? What do you look at first thing?
So I mean, my business day to day is podcast production and podcast strategy. So the first thing I look at is pod news, and then there's a whole variety of sources. Sounds Profitable, anything from Triton Digital, a whole bunch of great sources. There's BuzzStream, which covers how digital media is being portrayed. And I got a handful of newsletters. Other than pod news, what I'll do is scan the headlines, maybe look at the first sentence or two of each of these to see if they grab my interest. And then I like to sit back and take that same approach with news that I digest, which for me is not the morning, it's the middle of the day. And I admit I do go to Google News and look at the aggregation. And as soon as I see a story that I can see, in my opinion, is taking a certain approach to things, I'll deliberately go and look for the alternative approach. So if the story is taking a conservative approach, it's from Fox News, I'll go look for a CNN or an MSNBC or a BBC article that I think is probably going to provide the opposite viewpoint to that, and try to digest it that way. That's kind of my habit.
Yeah, I always like, you're good at pointing out to me sometimes the bias of some of my sources. So I think you're good at looking at things from both sides. And I think it's interesting too, how what you see in Canada is often quite a bit different than what we might be seeing here, and probably different than what you might be seeing in the US. And I think you just assume that, Western English speaking media are going to be serving up kind of the same stuff, but that's not necessarily the case. I always just find that interesting that you see things that we don't see, and maybe vice versa.
Al Jazeera, when you mention it, Farzana, that is a standout for me. Not because it does so much better a job than others, but for stuff in the Middle East, like the Gaza, the Israeli Palestinian conflict, I got so much from Al Jazeera that I did not get from the BBC.
And traveling as well. I think, when I just spent a few weeks in Sri Lanka, I just get the local English newspapers and start flicking through. And then, you learn just so much just from traveling. And I think so many people, actually, they do it a disservice where they travel and they still consume their usual news apps, where actually it's quite good to understand locally what the stories are and the framing and so forth. So I think that's a huge opportunity. And also your algorithms do actually change when you travel. So that's always quite interesting.
I learned from both of you too, working on the show every week. And it's not just different perspectives, but shared perspectives, right?
Yeah.
Well, thanks also for the shout out to New York Times app. I think it's one of the best apps in
it is, isn't it?
I go
so
to it
good.
Pretty often. You know what I miss, and then we'll move on. I miss the Twitter what's trending, and I know X is still doing it, but
it's really good. I think it's valuable
to me now. Is it still real?
Oh,
I just
absolutely. No, that's actually another key source for me. Usually in the evening when I'm that's my doom scroll. Not one that really looks at stuff on Instagram all that much. but I'll look at what's trending. I'll follow the game, and I'll look for people's comments on the game, and you trip across what's happening in the news.
Well, I don't think Blue Sky is, I mean, that has a trending feature too. I don't think it's quite cracked the code. It doesn't feel as expansive as what I remember Twitter doing.
Hard to do.
But interesting. Well, I wonder, I've been tracking some of the comments. Some probably aren't right for our show.
Well,
it's good to have varied input. Some will probably let's stay where they are. But if anybody does have something they want to share, either about where you get your news, the importance of getting outside of the episode that you're in and trying to get more expansive, or your New Year's resolutions, that would be great too. But speaking of the New Year, Doug, I know we have kind of you have a special episode of Stories and Strategies. Anything you want to share with us? What's coming up?
Well, we do. All three of us do.
Yes, you're right.
David, you were superstar in it. Farzan and I co-hosted. Let's see, this doesn't look like any city you've been to, right? Farzan and I go to the future, to an unnamed city, but we travel 10 years into the future and meet up with this Gallagher fella who leads a complicated corporation that has figured out a lot of things in public relations. More gender equity at the leadership table, how AI really fits in, and what the tools and techniques are, as well as entry-level positions. So it's a somewhat semi-utopian future that we travel to, and then we come back to the present day, so we can start implementing these changes.
When does it, remind me, when does it come out, Doug?
Tuesday morning for all, including
cool.
When you wake up in the UK. It'll be there if you subscribe on Apple or Spotify.
Well, YouTube. It was a lot of fun. Let me just bring up one prediction. This came in actually from the show before last, and I forgot to put it up on screen, but it's from our friend Bettina Garibaldi. She's actually the CMO and CFO for the upcoming FIFA 2026 competition, New York, New Jersey. And she says that as technology and AI accelerate how content is created and consumed, culture is placing renewed value on shared experience, collective energy, and familiar reference points. I think she's talking about big events like the World Cup, but I hope she's right. I hope that we can continue to focus on the things that bring us together. And of course, we wish her all the luck in the world for the upcoming World Cup. So sorry. Thank you for that, Bettina. I'm sorry I didn't get it up on the last show. Doug, I think we're just about out of time. Do you want to read us out? And
Happy New Year to both of you. It's great to see you both in the new year. Yeah. And Farzana, you're heading out my way in about a week or so. Okay. Bring that light sweater that I talked about.
I will. Yeah.
Right. Light gloves. Yeah. As always, thank you to superstar producer Emily Page, who got up January 2nd. It's in the morning in the Toronto area. Em got up and ran the show. Em, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The Week Unspun is a co-production of Folgate Advisors, Curzon Public Relations, and Stories and Strategies podcasts. You can catch the episodes on Apple, Spotify, our YouTube channels. We have a Stories and Strategies podcast YouTube channel, and the Curzon YouTube channel also carries the episodes as well. And a final thought. Don't be afraid to be silent. Silence is often self-protection. It's okay when you need to. It's not evidence that you don't care. But speak up when you can. When you speak, one small truth that you give allows others to love you more accurately. Have a great weekend.